All right, good evening again. I don't want you to think that we are flying through this Constitutional Convention part. We've already taken a lot of time in class to discuss the checks and balances, the process of government, and the way that the founders set up the government. So I don't want to take too long in these videos to go over the details, but also keep in mind that I'm giving you a copy of the notes. So you need to make sure that you are reading through the notes, and these videos, just like if I were lecturing in class, are going to be the highlights. I want you to come in to government class every day ready to discuss the things that we've talked about previously, ready to ask questions on the things that you don't quite understand. And that's a lot of what I'm using the quizzes for after each set of videos, is so that I can kind of grasp what you guys still need to work on. So I don't want you to be afraid that, all of the videos are going to be moving this fast. They're not. It's just that a lot of this introductory stuff is stuff that you've covered before. It's stuff, basic government stuff, 3 branches of government and things like that. So when last we left our heroes at the Constitutional Convention in the summer of 1787, they had scrapped the Articles of Confederation and were coming up with a new plan. Virginia's plan was to have representation among population and the large states like that. New Jersey's plan was to have representation among the states being equal, 1 vote per state in the unicameral legislature, unicameral being 1 house. And then the Connecticut Compromise, also known as the Great Compromise, that they came up with in July of 1787, said that there would be a bicameral legislature, one side represented by the people, and the other side where votes were equal among the states. And keep in mind that in that House, the Senate, the votes from the states were equal, and the senators were originally elected by state legislatures. This was another check against mob rule, against pure democracy, which a lot of the founding fathers did very much fear. On top of that, the Electoral College, as I mentioned in the last video, was a compromise where the electors were chosen by state conventions, were chosen by the states, and then those electors were the ones who actually chose the president. And so the popular vote really doesn't matter all that much when it comes to presidential elections, but in all the states, it's usually winner take all, where if you win the state, you win all of that state's electors. And that was a check against the people having a direct voice and electing somebody who was popular but not a very good leader, not a very virtuous leader either. The president's term of 4 years with no limit on re-elections was also a compromise because we didn't want to have a king. Now remember, the founders were founding a republic, not a democracy. They wanted a representative form of government. Pure democracy was not what they wanted because they feared that the people would elect the wrong people, would be led by the wrong people, and that the government of pure democracy would be at the whim of people's wants and their immediate emotions, rather than being a form of government that was more rational and more reserved. So make sure you keep in mind that. They wanted a balance in the legislature between the voters and the states, so that the federal government wouldn't be too popular, so that the federal government wouldn't be too powerful, and that the states would have some say in what went on. And so when states are electing people to the Electoral College, and when states are the ones who are choosing senators, those were seen as ways of keeping each state involved in the federal government process. Now, when we review the checks on the people, we have the Electoral College, we have the Supreme Court, which can veto laws that are put forward in the legislature. We have a tough amendment process, so that way it's not just a simple majority of people or even a simple majority of states that could change the Constitution. All of these were checks against what the founders really saw as the whims of the people, their irrational fears and whatever emergencies might come up. And so we've talked about the process to amend the Constitution. You're going to want to make sure that you know that. Now, this makes the government less secure, less responsive, but more secure against the whims of the people, and less responsive, but that's what the founders really did intend. We talked about that a lot today, so make sure that you're paying attention to that. Now, once the Constitution is submitted to the states for ratification, the founders stated that the states should not just go with a direct vote of the people, rather that state conventions should be formed, and that those state conventions would either then vote the Constitution up or down. And very quickly, those state conventions become separated into two groups within each convention. A group that wanted a strong federal government that could solve the problems that were present in the Articles of Confederation, and so that group became known as the Federalists, and the leading Federalist would be Alexander Hamilton. And then there was a group that stated that the Constitution was there in order to keep a balance, and that the states would not lose out to a strong federal government. And these people were known as the Anti-Federalists. They're headed up by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. And so really along those lines, the first political parties will be formed, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and those differences are really going to come about in George Washington's first cabinet. You have Secretary of the Treasury at Alexander Hamilton and Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, both of them on opposing sides of how strong the federal government should be. And since that original Constitution was very small, very short, just a basic outline of government, Washington had to make a lot of decisions and establish a lot of traditions that would become ingrained in the government later on. And so he was listening to both sides. Alexander Hamilton, a close friend of his on one side, who was a Federalist, wanted strong authority in the executive, wanted a strong federal government, and Thomas Jefferson, who really believed in the power of the legislature to represent the people, on the other side. And so often Washington would become involved in these procedural and philosophical arguments, and more often than not, he really did decide with Alexander Hamilton, yet Washington was never officially on the side of the Federalists. The Anti-Federalists claimed that the Constitution was there to protect democracy, and that it was there to protect the people from the whims of government and from their own ideological emotions. And so these are the arguments that went out in each of the state constitutions. And as we've already talked about in section E of part 5 of your notes, section E talks about why the framers didn't add a Bill of Rights. They felt that there was enough protection in the Constitution itself, and that states already had bills of rights for their people within their own state. But some states said that they would only accept the Constitution conditionally until a Bill of Rights was written, and that they were not going to accept it completely until there was a Bill of Rights. And so the Bill of Rights comes along very quickly later on in 1781. And that the Bill of Rights really does outline what Congress cannot do. We talked about the First Amendment, where it says Congress shall make no law, and that was really the first time where it was exactly spelled out what Congress could not do. In the next video, we're going to talk about slavery and some of the motives of the framers and how those historical views have changed over the years. So go ahead, and I'm going to post the quiz on this section. Please make sure you take the quiz. It's going to be another 5 points. So as you can see, these quizzes are not worth very much, but they're important so that we can direct the class, and they're important so that I can know what you guys are not understanding, or what we need to go over a little bit more strenuously. And so this will be the last video of the night. Tomorrow we'll talk about slavery, and we'll see you 4th period tomorrow.